Yes, we are connected now.
So we welcome our viewers once again to this spiritual rendezvous with our spiritual dost, guide and teacher, Shri Pratik Desai ji. Pratik Desai ji has decided to end this year on a very thoughtful note that we must discuss the importance of bhakti in delivering results, and because people generally believe, people have this notion that gyan, karma, there are so many types of yoga. You see, gyan yoga, karma yoga, ashtang yoga. We have all heard about various types of yoga, and people believe that these yogas by themselves are able to deliver liberation to a soul that is entangled in this material world. But is that true? Or is it that there is an important catalyst required, that is Bhakti Yoga? So we request Pratik ji that before this 2023 ends, he should shower this knowledge from our scriptures and tell us what do our scriptures, especially Bhagavad Gita, has to say on this subject. Over to you, Pratik ji.
Okay, thank you so much, Rajiv ji, for the wonderful topic. And it's a continuation of our decoding the final conclusion of Bhagavad Gita. And we have covered several topics. And I would like to just go through these topics which we have covered already, so that the audience can also be connected well. Because I think that to a good extent, all these topics are interrelated to each other. So if they would like to understand from a holistic point of view, then I recommend that they also somehow they are able to see the other topics also, hear those. And so these are, we started with the eligibility to comment on the Bhagavad Gita and the multiple path that it shares. And then second session, it was about whether demigod worship is proper and who are demigods, and why yoga in the Bhagavad Gita is interpreted as Bhakti Yoga by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ji in his Bhagavad Gita as it is. So there are many instances where yoga is actually in the context of karma, jnana, or dhyana. But why sometimes it is translated as or interpreted as bhakti, connected to bhakti yoga. And then the third topic that we have covered is bhakti not only awards results of all the paths, but a lot more also. So why bhakti is supreme amongst the different paths, and what result do we attain by practicing bhakti yoga. And then last session, we covered how the position of Lord Krishna is actually supreme, how the Bhagavad Gita itself declares the position of Lord Krishna as supreme. And it is like self-evident. We don't even have to we don't have to analyze many things in the Bhagavad Gita. Just by going through the verses, we can understand how Krishna is described as being the supreme. So these are the topics, the 4 parts that we have covered till now, and today we are going to also address the 5th part, which is as you have asked about the independent nature of karma, jnana, and dhyana, whether they are really independent or whether they are dependent on some factor. So we'll be discussing that. Okay. Okay, so now, see, some people may say that hydrogen and oxygen are constituents of water, right? So when hydrogen and oxygen, they are 2 different elements of water. So if you consider them separately, they are not dependent on water. but are independent elements, right? So when they combine together, they may be recognized as a part of water, but when they are independent, they are not. So someone may question or they may argue that jnana and yoga, jnana yoga, dhyan yoga, ashtanga yoga, when they are connected to bhakti, then probably they are independent. They are dependent on bhakti, but if they are considered to be independent as independent elements, then probably they are independent. So we'll try to answer this question now. Is this really true? So we'll take you through, as usual, we'll take you to the different verses of Bhagavad Gita, different chapters, which will actually very clearly state what is the role, function of all these different elements of bhakti. They are part of elements of bhakti, but at the same time, they're also completely dependent on bhakti for its result also. So how? So we'll see that. Okay, so now there are two types of dependence, right? One is you may be dependent on someone under a special condition or circumstance, but after the condition is over, circumstance is gone, then you may become independent. Or you may be dependent on something absolutely, which means that for all times you're always dependent. Like for example, we are always dependent on the Supreme Lord, because we are not the absolute controllers. The Supreme Lord is absolute controller. So we are always controlled by the Supreme Person. That's why we are always dependent on the Supreme Person for everything that we do, right? We cannot even live in this material world without the sanctioning of, because for living in this material world, we require earth, air, water, fire, air, all these elements are required. And if the Lord does not provide these elements, then we'll not be able to exist. So we are always dependent on the Lord. And then obviously we are controlled by birth, death, old age, disease. No one can claim, no one can deny these things. So our dependence on the Lord is absolute for all circumstances. But whether these other processes of other paths which can connect to the Supreme, are they absolutely independent or subjectively independent? Let's try to see this from the perspective of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, we are discussing the Bhagavad Gita because we are assuming the Bhagavad Gita is a conclusion of all the scriptures, and it is also called as Gita Upanishad, the essence of the Vedas, essence of Upanishads, because Upanishad in itself, they are essence of the Vedas. They are the philosophical and final conclusion of the Vedas. So in that sense, if we establish the fact that Gita is the conclusion, is the culmination of, or the conclusion, or the summary of the points of Upanishad, right? Then we can, if whatever Gita says, that becomes the ultimate authority for anyone. So what does the Gita speak about it? And that's the reason we are discussing about the Bhagavad Gita, because if you say that Bhagavad Gita is secondary to the conclusion of the Upanishads, then there is no point of discussing from the Bhagavad Gita or hearing its conclusion, because then it will be, Bhagavad Gita becomes it is minimized by some other scripture. So why to waste time on that? So that's why we have started with the assumption that Bhagavad Gita is the ultimate authority. And it is not something which is sentimental in nature. It is actually proven fact also by many acharyas, Arjun himself also. The Bhagavad Gita knowledge is actually directly coming from Krishna to Arjun, and that is, I think, acknowledged by every sect and every sampradaya of the followers of Sanatana Dharma. Although they may come to different conclusions of Bhagavad Gita, but this is our main purpose. Why are we having these sessions on deducting or decoding the final conclusion of Gita? Is because we want to arrive at the right conclusion. There are multiple variation and commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita. So we would like to come to the right conclusion by the evidence of Bhagavad Gita itself. Okay. So there are, okay, now in defining incidental and absolute dependence. So now incidental means something which is subjected to some condition. That's why we derive at a certain conclusion. So what are these conditions? So these are divided into two parts. One is sadhana, at the stage of sadhana, which means at the stage of practicing, the state of practice. Another at the stage of conclusion. At the stage of conclusion means by practice, what are you going to achieve? So that is called sadhya. So there are two parts, two conditions under which we can testify that these other yoga systems, they are actually dependent on bhakti yoga also. So these are sadhana at this and the stage of sadhya. Sadhya means the goal which is attained by the practice. So now so if it can be shown that other yogas, they are dependent on bhakti on only one condition, then that dependence is incidental. And if it is dependent on both conditions, then that dependence becomes absolute in nature. Right? So now let's try to start with the let's try to see if all these different paths, they are dependent on bhakti at incidental stage, or absolutely they are dependent. Okay, so dependence in sadhana practice. Now let's take three yogas, because these are the most prominent paths which people follow in India or throughout the world as a followers of Sanatana Dharma. So first is Karma Yoga, which is a very popular path. So we'll discuss about Karma Yoga first. So in verse number 5.10 of the Bhagavad Gita, which I will share that also. This is verse number 5, chapter number 5, and verse number 10. And let me share the screen also. Okay. So the sloka is as follows. Brahmani adaya karmani sangam takva karoti lipyatena sapapena padmapatram ivambhasha. So Brahmani unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, adaya resigning, karmani all works, sangam attachment, tattva giving up, karoti performs, ya who, lipyate is affected, na never, sa he, papena by sin, padmapatram a lotus leaf, iva like, ambasa by the water. The one who performs his duty without attachment, surrendering the results unto the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful action, as the lotus leaf is untouched by water. So here we can see that there is the mention of Brahmani. Now Brahmani it is mentioned and it is translated as unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So why not Brahman? Because it does not make sense to say that all the efforts that we do in this world should be surrendered to the Brahman, because Brahman is impersonal and does not have any traits or attributes. So there is no point of saying that one should surrender everything to the impersonal aspect of the Supreme. So it has to be Brahmani, which also means the Supreme Brahman. And Brahman's, the Bhagwan is also sometimes referred to as being the Supreme Brahman, because he is a source of Brahman also. Okay, so it makes sense to say that here, because here there is a word adaya, okay, resigning, and then sangam tattva. So so resigning, adaya is resigning, karmani all works, sangam is attachment, tattva is giving up, karoti performs, yahu lipyati is affected, never he, papena sin by sin, padmapatram lotus leaf like ambassa by the water. So by offering all these results to the Supreme Lord, is unaffected by sinful action. So whatever we offer to the Supreme, all the karmas that we do, we offer it to the Brahmani, supreme, then we always remain sinless. As the lotus leaf is also, although the lotus leaf is in like is floating on the water, but it is untouched. So similarly, by if we are performing some activities or work in this material world, or karma, doing some karma, that karma has to be offered to the Supreme Lord. Then we become free from the sinful actions. So here it is very clearly stated that all activities are meant to be offered to the Supreme Lord. Okay. So the essential feature of this practice is Brahmani Adaya Karmani, which is translated as surrendering of the results of activities unto the Supreme. So what is outlined as an element of Karma Yoga is synonymous with the symptom of Bhakti, defined in 9.26. So we'll go to verse number 9.26. So 9.26, very popular verse, the Bhagavad Gita. Patram pushpam phalam toyam yume bhaktya prayachati tad aham bhakti uparitam asnami prayatatmana. So patram, leaf, pushpam, a flower, phalam, a fruit, toyam, water, ya, whoever, me, unto me, bhaktya, me with devotion. Prayachati offers that aham, I, bhakti uparitam, offered in devotion. Asnami, accept, prayata atmana, from one in pure consciousness. If one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, flower, fruit, or water, I will accept it. So you do not accept, you do not offer these things to the Supreme Brahman, something which is impersonal in nature. So again, whatever is mentioned about Yome Bhakta Prayachati, Tad Aham Bhakti Uparitam. So Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam, Yome Bhaktya Prayachati. So me means unto me. That is very clear. So that unto me has to be a person. Now here also it's the same synonymous thing where it is mentioned that whatever you offer to me, it should be offered with devotion, and the Lord will accept it. There's also another verse which I think we'll discuss. I think later we'll probably share that later, which the verse talks about. That karma, whatever karma you do, it should be offered to Vishnu as a sacrifice. Otherwise, it causes bondage in the material world. So that we'll discuss. But then there is also another verse: Yat karoshi, yat juosi, yat tapasyati kaunte tat purusham arpanam. And that verse is also very important because there in the Bhagavad Gita it is clearly mentioned whatever work you are doing you should offer as of it should be offered to me. So yat karoshi, yat asnasi, yat juosi, yadashi, yat tapasyati kaunte tat purusham adarpanam. So yat whatever karoshi you do, yat whatever asnasi you eat, yat whatever juoshi you offer, dadashi you give away, yet whatever tapasyasi austerities you perform, Kaunteya, O son of Kunti, that Purushva do, mad unto me arpanam as an offering. Whatever you eat, whatever you do, whatever you offer or give away, and whatever austerities you perform, do that, O son of Kunti, as an offering to me. So this is very important. Whatever we are doing has to be offered to the Supreme Lord. So everything which is connected to karma is ultimately connected to devotion also. So this indicates that it is bhakti or devotion that is the prime element of practice in description of karma yoga. Okay, now a similar directive is given by the Lord in verse number 3.30. Okay, so this is the 30th verse from chapter 3. Mai sarvani karmani sannyasatma chetasa nirashir nirmano bhutva dasva vigata jvara. Mai, unto me, sarvani, all sorts of karmani activities, sannyasya, giving up completely, adhyatma with full knowledge of the self, chetasa, by consciousness, nirashi, without desire for profit, niramha, without ownership, bhutva, so being, yuddhasva, fight, vikata jvara, without being lethargic. Therefore, O Arjuna, surrendering all your works unto me with full knowledge of me, without desires for profit, with no claims of proprietorship, and free from lethargy, fight. So, Mai Sarvani Karmani is the very important sentence in this particular verse because it is very clearly, one can clearly make out from this verse by this statement, Mai Sarvani Karmani, that everything, all that you do, whatever karma you perform, Sarvani means all karmas that you perform should be performed for me. It should be offered to me. So obviously, you cannot offer something to an impersonal Brahman and does not make any sense. That's why when the Lord is saying that you offer everything to me, it means it becomes devotion. So there are significant points here, and one is that the repeated emphasis of surrender within the Karma Yoga system, right? In verse number 5.10 and in verse number 3.30, what we saw is the repeated emphasis of surrender within the Karma Yoga system, indicating the functional role of bhakti in making the practice effective. And second point is the implication of the word sarvani, all works. Krishna states that all activities should be surrendered to him. This perspective implies that the validity of the process of works depends on its suitability to be offered to the Lord. So the effect of this process will only yield the results if bhakti is accompanying that particular element. Otherwise, it will not yield any result. So, in other words, the entire process of work becomes an offering of devotion. Now, the statement of this verse, which is 3.30, is not an option. So, you don't have any option. The Lord does not give an option. And the subsequent verse, 3.31, clearly emphasizes that such a directive is unilateral order of the Lord, the neglect of which is nashtan, ruination in the effort towards perfection. So from both examples cited, the conclusion is that path of Karma Yoga is dependent on bhakti in practice. Okay, let's see the verse number 3.31, next verse. Yemam matam idam nityam anustistanti manava shraddhavanto na shruyanto chante api karma bhi. Ye, those who my matam injunctions, idam, these, nityam as an eternal function, anu tishtanti, execute regularly, manava, being human beings, shraddha vanta, with faith and devotion, anasu yanta, without envy, uchyante, become free, te, all of them, api, even, karmabi, from the bondage of the law of fruitive actions. So those persons who execute their duties according to my injunctions and who follow this teaching faithfully without envy become free from bondage of fruitive actions. Right? So um, so if we don't incorporate the element of bhakti, devotion, or connect all these things with the Lord, and you can only connect things with a person through devotion. So if you do not follow this, then um, you will not become free from the bondage of fruitive actions. Right? So this is how we can understand this. And so this, what we have done is karma yoga at the stage of sadhana, how it is dependent on bhakti, that we have come to the conclusion. Okay, so any questions or any comments?
No, Pratiji, this is pretty much straight, actually.
Okay. So now we'll go ahead and we'll also establish this for Gyan Yoga at the stage of sadhana. Okay, Gyan Yoga. Now the Gyani is described in verse number 7.19. So let's go to that. Okay. So verse number 7.19. बहुनां जन्मनां हन्ते ज्ञानवां मां प्रपद्यते वासुदेवं सर्वम् इति सामात्मा सुदुर्लभ. Bahunam, many, Janmanam, repeated birth and death. Ante, after, Jnanvan, one who is in full knowledge. Mam, unto me, Prapadyate, surrenders, Vasudev, the personality of Godhead. Sarvam, everything. Iti, thus, that Mahatma, great soul, Sudurlava, very rare to see. After many births and death, he who is actually knowledge surrenders unto me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes, and all that is such a great soul is very rare. It's a very self-evident verse, extremely straightforward, and very clearly we can deduct from this verse that how after many births one can become a jnani, and um, actually even the jnani should realize that one has, like, the supreme Lord is the ultimate shelter. He is the cause of everything. So then only he will truly be called as a jnani. Okay, because Gyanvam Mam Prapadyate. Gyanvan means one who is full in knowledge. So not that he has got part part realization or he's got incomplete knowledge. He can be called as Gyani. Gyani is the one who's got full knowledge. And what is that knowledge? That Vasudevam Sarvamiti Sa Mahatma Sudurlava. Vasudev is actually everything. Sa Mahatma Sudurlava. Now, okay, let's go ahead. So the Jnani is described in verse 7.19 as a practitioner efforts whose efforts span a continuum of many lives. And the final result of such cultivation is described by the Lord as prapadyate. So the word is translatable only one way, which is surrender. So surrender means devotion, because Jnani is generally strive for impersonal liberation. Lord Krishna is explicit as to whom we should surrender. He is not speaking about some non-differentiate concept of the absolute truth. Rather, he qualifies surrender by establishing its objective as being Vasudev, which is none other than himself. Because the concept of homogeneity is the attractive feature of the absolute to the Jnani, the Lord here emphasizes Sarvamiti is everything. So one can question that why, although Krishna says that Vasudevams, okay, Vasudev is stated, but then why he says Sarvamiti? So Sarvamiti is mentioned because for a Jnani, that is the most attractive feature of the Lord. I mean, apparently it is the attractive feature of the Lord for a Jnani, the all-pervading aspect of the Lord. So that's why he's doing Sarvamiti, which is also confirmation that Vasudeva is everything, indicating the subordinate feature of homogeneous aspect to the personality of Vasudeva himself. Had the Lord meant that Vasudeva is expansion of Brahman, everything, he would have said everything is Vasudeva. So here specific grammar sentence is composed so that one can come to the conclusion that Vasudeva is actually superior to the impersonal Brahman feature. Otherwise, it would have been said the other way around. It would have said that everything is Vasudeva. But the Lord is saying that Vasudeva Sarvamiti. So as a confirmation that such devotion is integral in the practice of Jnani, there is also another verse which is 7.17. And therein Lord Krishna states, Tesam Jnani Nitya Yukta Eka Bhakti. The Jnani is always engaged in devotion. Thus, in the following verse, 7.18, he is sure to reach Uttamam Gatim, the highest destination. So let's see what is there in verse number 17 and 18. ते संज्ञानि नित्ययुक्ता एक भक्ति विशिष्यते प्रिय हि ज्ञानी मुक्त्यर्थम अहम स च मम प्रिय tesam out of them jnani one in full knowledge nityayukta always engaged eka only bhakti in devotional service sishyate is special priya very dear he certainly jnanina to the person knowledge atyartham highly aham I am sa he che also cha also mama to me priya dear. So of these the one who is in full knowledge and who is always engaged in pure devotional service is the best, for I am very dear to him and he is dear to me. So here also it is confirmation that the Jnani is the best type of Jnani is the one who is engaged in full devotional service. And the verse number 18 it states, Udara sarva evaite jnani tva atmai va me matam आस्थिता से ही युक्तात्मा माम एवानुत्तमाम गतिम. Udara, magnanimous, survey all, eva certainly these. Jnani, one who is in knowledge too, but Atma eva, just like myself. Me, my, matam, opinion, astita, situated, sa he certainly, yukta Atma, engaged in devotional service, mam, in me, eva certainly, anutamam, the highest, gatim, destination. So all these devotees are undoubtedly magnanimous souls, but who is situated in knowledge of me, I consider to be just like my own self. Me matam, being engaged in my transcendental service, he is sure to attain me the highest and most perfect goal. Yukta Atma. So Yukta Atma is basically to connect with the Lord, to to connect so that to reciprocate with the Lord, and that means devotional service to the Lord. So all these three verses they again show the superiority of devotion comparison to Gyan, the process of Jnana, and it also shows that how Gyan is dependent on Bhakti. Now, third, we come to Ashtanga Yoga. So for Ashtanga Yoga, we will go to the verse number 6.47. Dhyan Yoga 6.47. Okay, now this is also a very self-evident verse. Yoginam api sarvesham madgate antaratmana shraddhamam bhajato yo mam same yuktatamo mata. And yoginam of yogis api also sarvesham all types of madgatena abiding in me, always thinking of me, anta atmana within himself, shraddhavan in full faith, bhajate renders devotional service. Here one who mam to me, so he may by me Yuktatama, the greatest yogi, Mata is considered. One of all the yogis, one with great faith who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me, is the most intimately united with me in yoga and the highest of all. That is my opinion. So it's a clear, self-evident verse from the Bhagavad Gita which defines how the yogi, the greatest yogi is the one who is always thinking of the Supreme Lord. So, again, indicating devotion to the Supreme Lord. So it's a irrefutable proof that the process of yoga is dependent in the practice on bhakti. And the term bhajate, rendering transcendental loving service, is not only exclusively used in the sense of devotion, but is also indicative of practice. So other words like mad gatena, in abiding in me, and shraddhavan, in full faith, are also devotional practices. Once again, it is concluded that sadhana of Ashtanga yoga is dependent on bhakti. So the natural conclusion of the above is all yoga systems are dependent in their various stages of practice on bhakti. Okay, now before going ahead with establishing that they are also dependent, all these three yoga paths, they are also dependent on bhakti at the stage of sadhya. We would like to analyze the dependence on bhakti of the sadhya of various yogas. We can refer to the familiar verses 18.57 and 18.58. So basically, this chapter is the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita, the summary of the Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter. Chetasa sarva karmani mahi sanyasya matpara buddhi yogam upashritya macchitta satam bhava. Chetasa, by intelligence, sarva karmani, all kinds of activities, mahi, unto me. Sanyasya, giving up, matpara, under my protection, buddhi yogam, devotional activities, upashritya, taking shelter of macchitta, in consciousness of me. Satatam, 24 hours a day, bhava, just become. So in all activities, just depend upon me and work always under my protection. In such devotional service, be fully conscious of me. So in all activities, one has to be dependent on the Supreme Lord. So this is a very clear verse also from 8.57. And the next verse, Machchita sarva durgani mat prasadat tarishyasi atha chetvam ahankaram nasosyasi vilankshasi. Mat of me, chitta being in consciousness, sarva all durgani impediments, mat prasadat by my mercy, tarishyasi you will overcome, atha but chet if from you ahankarat by false ego, na soshasi do not hear, vinangshasi you will be lost. Translation: if you become conscious of me, you will pass over all the obstacles of conditioned life by my grace. If, however, you do not work in such consciousness but act through false ego, not hearing me, you will be lost. So the absolute declaration within these verses has been discussed earlier. They confirm the conclusion above that karma, jnana, and ashtanga are dependent on bhakti in the stage of practice. In 18.57, Lord Krishna states, in all activities, just depend upon me and work always under my protection. The clear implication here is in the word sarva karmani, or all activities. It's a generic term and simply means all type of activities. When in reference to yoga practices, it can be paraphrased as all types of yogas. It leaves nothing to be excluded in terms of other yoga practices. So what has to be done? We have to be dependent on the Lord for everything and work under his protection and be fully conscious of the Lord. So now someone may say that what if I am not able to do it? So can I achieve some measure of success anyway? And so verse number 18.58 is the answer to this question. If you do not work in such consciousness, you will be lost. So no work succeeds without bhakti. No yoga succeeds without a connection with devotion. So conclusion is all yoga practice certainly dependent on bhakti in the stage of practice. Now we'll go through in the stage of the dependence in the stage of sadhya, perfection. Okay, before that, any questions or any comments?
No, Pratikji, I think here, Lord, in all the verses, very clearly indicating of how the jiva or the devotee has to be fully conscious of uh, being centered around Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And only that can facilitate any sort of spiritual evolution, which is the prime goal of our existence in the material world.
Okay, so let's continue ahead. So we'll start with, okay. So the next point that needs to be investigated is the dependence of the perfectional state of yoga systems on bhakti. Yoga is meant to solve the problems of life. Therefore, the resolution of such problems leads to liberation from material existence. Although different yogas systems award different types of liberation, this topic is not discussed here. What is to be noted is how liberation in any yoga practice is achieved. So verse number 3.10, 3.19, 5.6, 6.5, 1.5 will be used as examples which indicate the liberation achieved by different yoga system. Karma yoga is described in verse number 3.10 and 3.19. Sankhya yoga described in 5.2. Ashtanga in 6.15. However, in the following study, we'll find that the liberation resulting from this system is never free, unbound. Rather, it is always qualified in the verse or in ensuing verses in some way. That qualification is its dependence on bhakti. So let's take all these verses in different yoga parts. So first we start with Karma Yoga. So in verse number 3.9, the phrase Yagnarthat indicates that unless karma is performed for the sake of Vishnu, one will not achieve liberation. In fact, that karma will be bandhana, binding to the material world. So let's take verse number 3.9. Yagnarthat karmana nyatra lokoyam karma bandhana tadartham karma kaunteya mukta sangha samachara. So yagna arthat, done only for the sake of yagya or Vishnu, karmana, then work. Anyatra, otherwise lok, world, ayam, this, karma bandhana, bondage by work. Tat, of him, artham, for the sake, karma, work, kaunteya, son of Kunti. Mukta sangha, liberated from association. Samachar, do perfectly. Work done as sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed, otherwise work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction, and in that way you'll always remain free from bondage. So work has to be, as I have already shared this earlier, the work has to be done for the satisfaction of Yagya or Vishnu, Lord Vishnu. So Yagya is actually another form of Lord Vishnu, and everything has to be offered in sacrifice to Yagya. Then only the work will become free from its bondage. Otherwise, it will cause us bondage in this material world. So this is very clear and established in this verse. So two things are very significant here. One is that Karma Yoga is capable of awarding liberation only in contact with bhakti or devotion to yagya, right? The other is that devoid of devotion, one will achieve the antithesis of liberation, which is bondage. So this is in line with the argument derived from verse 18.57 and 18.58. So it is very clear. See, the goal of any yoga is to solve the problem of life, as we have already discussed this. And what is that problem? The problem is entanglement in the material world, bondage in the material world, suffering in the material world. And what is the solution for it? Solution is to get liberation from this material world. Now, in this particular verse, it is very clearly stated that work done as sacrifice to Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, whatever work we are doing, it will cause bondage in the material world. That means karma is directly dependent on the devotion to the Lord. Because karma, if we are doing it without devotion to the Lord, then we are disconnecting it from the Lord, or we are not offering it as a sacrifice to the Lord. So that means this kind of karma will cause us bondage. Now, what happened is this same karma has actually caused bondage in the material world, which is supposed to give us liberation. That karma yoga turned out to be uh, contrary to what it is supposed to give us, right? So it means clearly that karma yoga cannot bestow the result of liberation without devotion. That means it has become completely dependent on devotion. So very clear. Okay, so now we'll see the Gyan Yoga. The common study of Jnana and Karma are the topic of beginning of the 5th chapter. After introducing Jnana Yoga, Lord Krishna qualifies the rewards to be achieved by renunciation in verse 5.6. The word ayogata indicates that even if one is practicing yoga, the result one achieves may be just the opposite. Indeed, one may be ayogata or disconnected. How is that? So, although Gyan Yoga is the topic, the words Yoga Yukta indicates some other engagement is needed, something other than what is already being performed in Gyan Yoga. That is, if real yoga or connection with the Supreme is to be achieved. So, let's go to the verse number 5.6. Sanyasastu mahabhaho dukkam aptam ayogata yoga yukta munir brahma nachirenadhigacchati. Sannyasa, the renounced order of life, two, but Mahabaho, O mighty armed one, Dukkham, distress, Aptam, afflicts one with, Ayogata, without devotional service, Yoga Yukta, one engaged in devotional service, Muni, a thinker, Brahma, the supreme, Na Chirena, without delay, Adi Gachati, attains. So merely renouncing all activities, yet not engaging in devotional service of the Lord, cannot make one happy. But the thoughtful person engaged in devotional service can achieve the supreme without delay. So, as shared in this particular context, that here this word is very important, ayogata. So, uh, yoga yukta. Here it is included to indicate that we also require some kind of other connection and not just jnana. Okay, in order to achieve the result, some other engagement is also required. So, which is already something other than which is already done in Jnana Yoga, in the practice of Jnana Yoga, in order to achieve the result or the goal. Okay, and now Yoga Yukta. So, what is that Yoga Yukta? Yoga Yukta has to be devotion to the Supreme Lord. Right? So, and in order to further confirm this, we can also see from the next verse. Yoga Yukto Vishuddhatma Vijitatma Jitendriya Sarvabhutatma Bhutatma Kurvan Apina Lipyate. Yoga Yukta, engaged in devotional service, Visuddha Atma, purified soul, Vijitatma, self-control, Jitendriya, having conquered the senses, Sarvabhuta, to all living entities, Atma Bhut Atma, compassionate. Kurvan Api, although engaged in work, na never Lipyate, is entangled. One who works in devotion is a pure soul and who controls his mind and senses is dear to everyone, and everyone is dear to me. So always working, such a man is never entangled. So Yoga Yukta has to be someone who is engaged in some activity. Okay, and that activity is basically devotion. So this is how we can actually understand that something else is required apart from the performance of Jnana Yoga, and this something else has to be devotion. So the implication of the word yukta is clear. It is a term used in connection with devotion. To further confirm, we may turn to next verse, which I have already shared. And this is confirmed verse number 10 of that chapter by words Brahmani Adaya, which we have already discussed. Brahmani Adaya Karmani, that all karma should be offered to Brahmani, which is Supreme Lord, or resigning one's work to the Supreme. Thus, Jnana is described as being functional when in contact with devotional service. So the same message is given as a summary of practice of Jnana in 7.19 also. Therein, a Jnani is shown to achieve the platform of Vasudev Sarvamiti, accepting Vasudeva as all in all. This has been described as the unidirectional characteristic of Ananya Bhakti earlier. So in verse number 7.19, Bahunam Janmanam Ante Jnanamamam Prapadyate. The same concept is also there. So implicit in this understanding is the converse. If the Jnani does not come to that realization, then he will continue in the cycle of repeated birth and death. Because see, the verse 7.19 says, Bahunam Janmanam Ante Jnanavam Mam Prapadyate. Finally, when Jnanis they come to this point that Vasudem Sarvaviti Sam Atma Sudurla. So they have to come to this point that the Jnani should come to the point that Vasudev Sarvamiti. Then only that repeated cycle of birth and death is stopped. So it means that if Jnani does not come to that realization, then they will have to continue repeated cycle of birth and death, which means no liberation. So right, so it means again that the Gyan, the process of Gyan Yoga also cannot bestow the result. And ultimately, in order to achieve the result, a Gyan Yogi has to finally realize the Supreme Lord, and he has to be dependent on the process of bhakti or devotion. Okay, now the third one, which is Ashtanga Yoga. Okay, so in the study of Ashtanga Yoga, the same conclusion is readily reached. So verse number 6.15 indicates that constant yoga practice will lead one to Mat Samstham, the abode of the Lord. And what is that yunjam or practice Krishna speaks about? It is obviously devotion, as shown in the meaning of the root word yukta above. So for those in doubt, they may turn to previous page in the Gita. In verses 6.13 to 14, the Lord has given the direction of such practice with the words Mat Chito Yukta Asita Mat Para. One should meditate upon me in the heart and make me the ultimate goal of life. This is certainly verification that it is bhakti which succeeds in awarding liberation to the perfect yogi. So analysis of other verses on Ashtanga Yoga such as 6.37 will support the same conclusion. The conclusion is that in this subsection is that the sadhya or perfectional stage of yogas is also dependent on bhakti to award liberation. So let's see verse number 16.13, 14, 13 to 15. Samam kaya shirogrivam dharayan achalam sthira sampreksha nasikagram swam disash chanava lokayan prashantatma vigata bhi brahmachari pratesthita mana samyamya machitto yukta ashita matpara. So one should hold one's body, neck and head erect in a straight line and stare steadily at the tip of nose. Thus, with an unagitated, subdued mind, devoid of fear, completely free from sex life, one should meditate upon me within the heart and make me the ultimate goal of life. So, mat upon me, chitta concentrating the mind, yukta the actual yogi, asita should sit, mat me, para the ultimate goal. So, one has to meditate upon the Supreme Lord. This is clear from this verse. Next verse. Yunjan evam sadatmanam yogi niyata manasa shantim nirvana paramam mat samstam adigachati. Thus practicing constant control of body, mind and activities, the mystic transcendentalist, his mind regulated, attains to the kingdom of God or abode of Krishna by cessation of material existence. So mat, some stham, the spiritual sky, right? So this word is very important, that one will attain. So by this verses also we can clearly understand that bhakti devotion is necessary to attain the goal. And then verse number 31, 6.31. सर्वभूत स्थितं यो मां भजति एकत्वम् अस्थितः सर्वथा वर्तमानोऽपि सा योगी मयि वर्तते. Such a yogi who engages in the worshipful service of the Lord, knowing that I and the super soul are one, remains always in me in all circumstances. Mam me bhajati serves in devotional service, ekatvam in oneness, astita situated. Sarvata in all respects, yogi the translator, mai in me, vartate remains. So bhajati ekatvam serves in devotional service, ekatvam. That is very important verse here also. So the conclusion of dependence on bhakti. The initial premise is that the other yoga systems are dependent on bhakti yoga. This proposition has been analyzed, right? And we have seen that in both stages, these other yoga paths, they are dependent on bhakti. But that dependence is also absolute. It is not incidental. That also we have seen. And bhakti is also contained in other yoga systems. So the fact that other yoga systems are dependent on bhakti to avoid any result indicates that the practice of bhakti must be contained within those systems also. In other words, every yoga system is the practice of bhakti, a bit indirect. This is implicit in the now familiar verse 18.57, which we have already shared earlier. It is also implied that bhakti is present in each yoga system. It is to be expected that that where such devotional emphasis is neglected, the effort which the practitioner undertakes is a waste of time. This is clearly emphasized in the description of Ashtanga Yoga in verses 10 to 33 in chapter 6. Lord Krishna repeatedly emphasizes devotion to the super soul directly, indirectly. The same can be said for Jnana and Karma Yoga also. Yeah, so now we'll just conclude this by establishing how Bhakti is independent. So there are many verses, like which talks about the independence of Bhakti and does not indicate any tinge of mixing of the other processes in order to achieve the result of bhakti. So some verses are 11.54 and 55. So let me just go through that and we can conclude the chapter and the session also after this. So this is verse number 11.54 and 55. भक्त्या त्व अनन्याय शक्य अहम एवं विदो अर्जुन ज्ञातम दृष्टम च तत्वेन प्रविष्टम च परंतप. My dear Arjuna, only by undivided devotional service can I be understood as I am standing before you and can thus be seen directly. Only in this way you can enter into the mysteries of my understanding. So very straightforward, clear uh, verse where Krishna is saying that Bhaktya Ananyaya, by devotional service, Ananyaya, without being mixed with fruitive activities or speculative. Ananya means everything else, without everything else. Shakya, possible. Aham, I am. Evam Vida, like this. Okay, so this is another indication of the independence of bhakti. And next verse 11.55, mat karma krim mat paramo mat bhakta sangha varjita nirvir vaira sarva bhuteshu yasamam eti pandava. So here the word sangha varjita is also important, as the same meaning as ananyaya, which means that it should be without anything, and that bhakti can actually give a direct result. So, my dear Arjun, you engage in pure devotional service free from contamination of fruitive and mental activities and mental speculation. He who works for me, who makes me the supreme goal, who is friendly to all living beings, he certainly comes to me. So this is a direct process result of bhakti. Just by doing this, one can directly come to the conclusion that bhakti can award liberation, the ultimate liberation. And then verse number 12.8 also explains the symptom of perfection state of pure devotion, characterized by being fully absorbed, mind intelligence in Lord Krishna. So this is given as guaranteed means for living in Krishna always. Right? So verse number 12.8. मयि एव मन आधत्स्व मयि बुद्धिं निवेशय निवाशिष्यसि मयि एव अत ऊर्ध्वं न संशय. Just fix your mind upon me, the supremacy of Godhead, and engage all your intelligence in me. Thus, you'll always live in me without, uh, in me always without a doubt. So everywhere, my eva mana, yeah. So all these terms are used, which is clear that by fixing intelligence and mind upon the Lord, one will definitely live in the Lord always, which means one will achieve perfection of liberation. And 12.9. So atha chittam samadhatum na shokrasi maya stiram abhyasa yogina tato mam chaptam dhananjaya. My dear Arjuna, O winner of wealth, if you cannot fix your mind upon me without deviation, then follow the regulative principles of Bhakti Yoga. In this way, develop a desire to attain me. Mam Ichaptam Dhananjaya. So Mam Ichaptam means to attain me, desire to attain me. So Bhakti is absolutely independent of anything else. So Krishna's usage of words to establish the independence of Bhakti implies that is not only independent of other yoga processes, but also everything else. This has been shown to be the case for Bhakti in practice as well as perfection. By studying Gita, we can conclude other yoga systems are found to be qualified by their dependence on Bhakti. On the other hand, devotion is not qualified by other yoga practices for its perfection. Bhakti is functionally independent of anything other than itself. So the conclusion of this section is that Bhakti is absolutely independent of any other process. Okay. So with this, we can end this session. We conclude that Bhakti is independent, absolutely independent, and does not require anything else compared to the other process of Jnana, Karma, and Ashtanga. All right. So any final comments and questions, Rajiv?
So Pratikji, I think that was a very systematic line you have taking us through all the verses. If I could request you that as footnotes to the upload on social media or YouTube, when you're loading this video, if in the notes you can mention these verses. So for future reference, one can make notes from these and use them as very useful reference for building these, philosophies for studying this topic that you're in detail when one needs to go through them in detail. I think that would be a nice addition to the information that you have.
So you mean to say in the
verse numbers that you have taken us in the sequence.
Verse numbers in the description of the YouTube video?
Yeah, being the author, it allows you the option to add notes below. So if you can just simply put those in line that why Bhakti is independent, these are the verses. How Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga is dependent on Bhakti or on the devotional service to Supreme Personality of Godhead, these are the verses. So that would be quite wonderful, I think.
Yeah, okay. And these notes will be, I've never used it earlier, but so these notes will be available when we
Yeah, when you get to this, your channel and on the videos below, there is the option of, there's something you write about the video that is being the topic of the discussion here. And there you can add these notes. You can include this text that.
Okay, we'll try next time.
Okay. Even after the video is uploaded, you can make those notes there. Anytime that is
No, I
convenient.
mean, it could be shared in the description also to the link.
Yeah,
of
yeah, in the description. In the description of
the YouTube video which I upload on my channel. So like you click on that topic, there's a description actually. So when you click on the description, then it will,
yeah. Correct, exactly. There only, there itself.
yeah, that can be added.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So any comments or questions you have, like to the topic?
I'm pretty convinced by how you've taken us around the line.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Rajiv ji, for
All right.
taking the time and having the session. So we'll continue with decoding uh, further topics from the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita next month.
Okay. Namaskar. Right.